If you're raising a well-behaved child, the kind who always listens, never talks back, gets good grades without being asked, you might think you've done everything right. And in one sense, you have. These kids are easy. They're praised by teachers, admired by other parents. They make you look good. But here's what nobody tells you. The traits that make a child good often set them up to struggle as adults. Not because they lack intelligence or talent, but because obedience trains something very different from confidence. So why do we value this so much? Because for most of human history, obedience was survival. Children who listened to their parents didn't wander into danger. They learned the skills they needed. They fit into the community. And even now, compliant kids make life easier. They don't fight you at bedtime. They do their homework without a battle. They don't embarrass you in public. It feels like you're raising a responsible, respectful human. And compared to the chaos some parents face, it feels like you're winning. But what we're actually seeing isn't maturity, it's adaptation. These kids have learned that love, safety, and approval come with conditions. And they've become very, very good at meeting those conditions. Here's what's actually happening inside that good kid. Psychologists call it developing an external locus of evaluation. That's a fancy way of saying the child learns to evaluate their worth based on other people's reactions, not their own internal signals. When a child is praised for being quiet, obedient, and high-achieving, but ignored or subtly rejected when they're messy, loud, or needy, they start to make a calculation. They learn, I am lovable when I perform. I am safe when I comply. So they build what psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called a false self. Not a fake personality, but a protective one. A version of themselves designed to keep the parent happy, the teacher pleased, the system running smoothly. And underneath that, the true self, the one with needs, anger, opinions, desires, gets buried. Because expressing it feels dangerous. The child isn't thinking this consciously. They're just doing what every human does, ensuring attachment. And for a kid, losing attachment isn't just painful, it's a threat to survival. So they sacrifice authenticity to stay connected. This works beautifully until it doesn't. Because the skills that kept a child safe don't translate to adult life. When these kids grow up, they often hit a wall. They might get into a prestigious college, land a respected job, even get married, and feel completely empty because they've succeeded at someone else's life. They spent so long figuring out what other people wanted that they never learned to ask, what do I actually want? Decision-making becomes paralyzing, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've been trained to look outward for answers instead of inward. They struggle to set boundaries. Saying no triggers intense guilt, even when the request is unreasonable. They become people pleasers in relationships, at work, with friends, constantly scanning for approval, terrified of disappointing anyone. And when they finally burn out, they don't understand why. They did everything right. They followed all the rules. But the rules were never designed to build a self. They were designed to hide one. Research backs this up. Longitudinal studies show that adults raised by authoritarian parents, high control, low warmth, have significantly higher rates of depression and anxiety, even into their elderly years. The good kid doesn't just struggle at 25. They struggle at 45, at 65, because the cost of compliance isn't paid once, it compounds. So let's be clear about the trade-off. When a child learns to be good through compliance, here's what they're training. They're training the ability to read a room, to anticipate what others need, to perform under pressure. They're learning discipline, responsibility, how to follow through. And those aren't bad skills. But here's what gets suppressed in the process. 1. Autonomy, the ability to trust their own judgment, even when it conflicts with authority. 2. Assertiveness, the capacity to say, this doesn't work for me, without collapsing into guilt. 3. Risk tolerance, the willingness to try something they might fail at, because failure won't destroy their identity. 4. Self-advocacy, the confidence to negotiate, push back, or walk away from situations that don't serve them. 5. Internal motivation, the ability to pursue something because it matters to them, not because someone will be impressed. What they gain is external polish. What they lose is internal foundation. And the cruel irony is this: the world rewards them for it as children and punishes them for it as adults. Because adult life doesn't care how well you follow instructions. It asks, can you lead? Can you decide? Can you tolerate conflict and uncertainty? And if you've been trained to avoid all of that to stay safe, you're starting from behind. So if obedience isn't the goal, what is? The goal is to raise a child who can tolerate being themselves, even when it's inconvenient for you. A child who can say, I don't like this, without fearing they'll lose your love. A child who can make a decision, get it wrong, and not spiral into shame. A child who knows the difference between cooperating because they choose to and complying because they're afraid not to. This doesn't mean raising a defiant or disrespectful kid. It means raising a kid who has access to their full range, cooperation and resistance, politeness and assertion. Because confidence isn't built by always being right. It's built by being allowed to be wrong, and still being worthy of connection. Autonomy isn't built by perfect behavior. It's built by making choices, small ones at first, and learning to trust your own judgment. What we want isn't a child who never challenges us. We want a child who can challenge the world when it matters and still come home to safety. That's the long game, not a kid who makes us look good, a kid who knows who they are. Here's the question worth sitting with. If your child never disappointed you, never pushed back, never made things difficult, would you actually know who they are? Or would you just know who they've learned to be for you? The good kid isn't a failure of parenting, but they might be a sign that somewhere along the way, your child decided that being loved meant not being themselves, and that's worth noticing. Not to fix it tonight, not to panic, just to ask yourself, what am I rewarding? What am I ignoring? Because the goal was never to raise a perfect child. It was to raise a whole one. If you want more evidence-based insights that actually work in real life, subscribe.